Are we in a situation now where we have a literal matter to attend to? Okay, the unfortunate thing is they picked the 20th. Okay. Are we in some sort of situation where there is a 90-day import exports term connected to what was supposed to be President Trump's final report concerning the 2020 census? See, there was the case that was decided in December, I believe, of 2020. It had to do with Trump versus New York. And there was an opinion that was issued. And my understanding is that he had until the end of the year, December 31st. But there's a big problem that nobody talked about. December 31st, 2020 was also a date that was referenced in a piece of legislation that was not passed and signed into law, but that did have congressional committee hearings that had identified December 31st of 2020 as being the date by which certain accomplishments associated with an understanding of the inventorying and other kinds of assessments associated with facilities responsible for containing hazardous waste materials up to and including nuclear waste materials was due. This was a report that came from a piece of legislation that was nearly 20 years old, if not 20 years old by that time of the end of 2020. But within that piece of legislation, there was a congressional hearing that specifically discussed getting inventories on facilities that already existed in the United States and assessing the viability. And the date by which that was to be accomplished and finalized was to be December 31st, 2020. Now, it is possible that because the bill did not get passed, that did not have the full force of law. But it is also possible that that requirement ended up getting appropriated in some other manner. And there was a major timeline that had already been working in consideration specifically of radioactive nuclear waste and nuclear waste disposal that was running concurrent to other processes. Now, one of these things that's been happening is they've been discussing with these particular centers, like the one here in Dallas, that there's supposed to be a 90-day timeline. And if I already mentioned, the 90-day timeline is also connected to provision of residential or in services, including for people that have need of a homeless shelter or domestic violence shelter as assistance. And part of what I've been attempting to have formal redress in regards to is these specific timelines and the abrogation of policy and procedure necessary to justify that the specific programs that are being administered through these facilities, as well as the actual programs themselves, are in compliance with not only the justifications for the financing associated with them, but that they're also involved in patterns of racketeering activity that include acts of human trafficking and efforts of to extort people into, among other things, cooperating with a pattern of illicit acquisition and distribution of prescription medications. And this illicit acquisition and distribution of prescription medications has other implications. And this has been since 2017. And now, without any redress for that, and with other horrendous, egregious violations, not only of the Texas Constitution, but also the federal Constitution, both in terms of how it's been handled within Texas, but how it's also been handled on the federal level, and what the implications of that were. Now we're at the situation we're at. There's right now an article that says that the Department of Justice said that we're not going to release data on the number of undocumented immigrants living in each state before January 20th. Has this data ever been released? This would be 20 days after the deadline by which Donald Trump would have been required to release the information. Has that data been released? Or has there been some form of default or an attempt to obscure from the public that data so that it can be made available as part of some alternative arrangement, including through the State Department, including in connection with illegal exportation? Is this connected to the refusal of anybody to draw attention to the executive proclamation that was on the White House website for a temporary period of time at the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, concerning invocation of certain aspects of the New START Treaty specific to the Department of State and the Department of Defense. So was this part of a premeditated, coordinated strategy around illegal expropriation of human capital from Americans up to and including born citizens of the United States who were political opposition, but also potentially people that were born in other countries that were either legal residents, asylum seekers, or themselves citizens after going through a period of citizenship, that were allowed to be culled via demographic data that was allowed to be reapportioned to or through the Department of Commerce for illicit and illegal redistribution, including potentially for foreign export. That means treason. We're talking about actual treason. Where's the data? And if I'm correct, today would be 91 days since the information since the time frame when Donald Trump would have been required to provide that information. Were they trying to get a stall with this for 15 more days? See, the problem is that if it's not appropriately attended to, then we're a few days short of a deadline that would fall on April 20th. And that's not going to happen. You're not going to get away with that. No, I apologize. There has to be other action taken. You're already in Dallas, at least. We're already working on another deadline, one of which only has another 24 hours, another of which has another 48 hours. And so I'm going to go on the record right now. It's 3:57 p.m. on March 31st, 2021, here in Dallas, Texas. If, in fact, the President of the United States intentionally refused to disclose and or the disclosure of the information connected to the United States Census was intentionally prevented from disclosure in accordance with what were congressional mandates and constitutional mandates concerning the census, so that it could be used through some other process to allow for the exportation of expropriated human capital of American citizens and or others in the United States as residents, I contend it's treason. You're not allowed to do that. No matter who you're expropriating it for and exporting it to, it serves the interests of the enemies of the United States to misrepresent and mischaracterize the people of the United States, especially at a time like this. And I just want to remind you, there had already been submitted to the Supreme Court of the United States a request for articles of impeachment against the United States Senate for engaging in processes that would aid and abet just such actions. This was submitted to the Supreme Court of the United States, dated for January 16th of 2021. I'm sorry, 2020. January 16th of 2020, I submitted a request for articles of impeachment against the United States Senate to the Supreme Court of the United States. And it was for exactly this sort of concern.